there were capable people who wanted to and had the intelligence and fortitude to become CAs, and the system in place at the time wasn't set up to do that. For the first, I would say, a good 7 or 8 years, we did not have designated roles in the business in terms of there was no CEO, there was no CFO, there was no formal leader, so to speak. When we have difficult problems, again, we tend to get heated, we tend to exaggerate, we tend to become anxious, and those things are all aspects that get in the way of clarity of thought. Yeah, emotional intelligence is important because we are not logical. we don't see things clearly, and we are flawed people.
Coming from a CA, that is so interesting.
From a founding perspective, this wasn't built around tech. Tech combined with societal change gave mechanisms for the original vision to be implemented.
True innovation is coming up with solutions that change the trajectory of people's economic standing. And my guest today embodies that. Today, we are having the Founder Series.
Control Alt Succeed.
Control Alt Succeed is proudly brought to you by Milpark Education, redefining what online learning sounds like. Visit milpark.ac.za for more information.
Gareth co-founded CA Connect in 2009 and led the team that merged with Milpark Education to become the first online SAICA-endorsed CTA in South Africa. And Gareth has been on the Financial Reporting Technical Committee, which advises the Minister on matters relating to financial reporting standards. He is also an expert advisor to the JSE and SAICA's Financial Reporting Investigation Panel. Gareth, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Michelle.
It must take an interesting mindset to achieve all of these things, and that's something I'm really looking forward to unpack today. You co-founded CA Connect, and even when I was just talking about it in the intro, it's the biggest contributor to the SAICA board exam in South Africa. How did the idea land, and what problem were you trying to solve at the time?
I think it was clear at the time we started, and I mean, if I can take a step back and give you some context for where we were when kind of the idea of CA Connect came about. Me and my co-founders were at the end of our articles. We hadn't really had any proper job, so to speak, in the world, and we were essentially looking to find our place in the world and where we would take our lives. I think it came at a time when we identified that the CA space was not helping students who were capable of becoming CAs, but for whatever reason couldn't study on a full-time basis. It didn't seem right that there were capable people who wanted to and had the intelligence and fortitude to become CAs and huge contributors to society and the economy, and that the system in place at the time wasn't set up to do that. So very naively, we went into this world of let's see if we can improve the system and create something.
Yeah. As an entrepreneur myself, I know partnerships can be a very interesting thing to navigate. And I'm curious to know what is kind of, throughout whatever ups and downs that could have occurred, but what has kept you guys focused on the initial goal that you started, even in its evolution?
Big building blocks that I'm grateful that we put in place is when we started CA Connect, I think we were very clear that we were both all in and equal shareholders in the process. And it meant that our incentives were aligned to build what we did together and to not have any misalignment. And that meant that in the early days of a business, things don't fit in boxes. Things are messy. And for example, at one time in the business, I think Ron had some spare capacity and he went and taught maths at a school because that's what he wanted to do, and he made money through that. But our agreed mechanism was that he wasn't earning money in his private capacity, that was doing work as part of the business. And so it sounds strange in some ways to others, but as part of our group that started the business, he would come back and equally share the money that he made from that. Oh, wow. And it sounds strange, but what it did is when we made decisions, we weren't making individual decisions. We were making decisions for the greater good of what we were doing together. And so small things like that might seem somewhat trite, fundamentally kept us aligned and together because no one had a personal incentive to do anything, and we were incentivized to keep focused on that goal. Another thing that I think really helped within that was that for the first, I would say, a good 7 or 8 years, we did not have designated roles in the business, in terms of there was no CEO, there was no CFO, there was no formal leader, so to speak. What we found quite early was that when you have different personalities who aren't mature enough and don't have the insight to know each other well enough, it causes conflict. And so within the first year or two of the business, we were forced to have very difficult conversations and go through difficult processes. And we were also fortunate enough to come through specific tools that helped us get to know each other, to articulate our strengths about our personalities and understand each other, to understand who needed to take the lead on certain things. So in certain projects, I would take the lead. In certain projects, Andrew would. In certain projects, Leon, Tracy, and Ron would. But it wasn't because they were the CEO, or it wasn't because they had a designated role. But we organized rather around understanding each of our personalities and our talents and capabilities for what we were good at. When you have an entity that too soon creates linear, narrowly defined roles for the sake of organizing in an organization, people don't always play to their strengths. And as people, we can't be well-rounded. The only way we can be well-rounded is as a group. We each have unique strengths and capabilities, but individually we are flawed and incomplete. So coming back to your question, I think the big building blocks of aligned incentives and equal structures, that we weren't thinking about ourselves, but thinking collectively, combined with knowing each other and being flexible enough to work around our strengths rather than narrowly defined roles, I think were two big building blocks that I'm grateful that we put in place near the beginning, that I think helped us get through some of those initial stages. Because when you're 1, 2, 3 years into a business, they're fragile and they don't necessarily persist. And there were moments like that. And I think those types of building blocks were contributors to, I think, keeping us aligned and together.
You know, you've just shared so much that as you're speaking, I think I drew a whiteboard in my head with circles everywhere and just so many pointers, because I think you've just given a masterclass on self-leadership, which is such an important a skill if you are an entrepreneur and you're trying to build anything. And I'm curious to know, how are you now kind of filtering down that to the organization, where it's no longer just the co-founders now, but the team has grown, it's been over the years, and how does that translate into culture, systems, and processes?
Yeah, I'm a big believer in teams and people being collectively more than what individuals are on their own. And so I think a lot of the learnings we've taken from founding CA Connect, we try to bring into the culture. Things do change, and there's definitely eras. So at different levels of scale, I think different things work. So what I would not recommend for a big organization is to not have roles and fluidly designate responsibilities. But I think there is an element within teams, and we still do these exercises within teams where we use psychometric tools. We use StrengthsFinder, we use Enneagram, we use a number of these things to encourage teams to get to know each other, so that while it's not completely fluid and unstructured, that teams do understand each other's strengths. When I reflect back, something I'm very grateful for is that the other founders in CA Connect were very different to me. And as I say, it caused a lot of conflict initially, but I think we did the hard work of getting to know each other, and through that we were able to find some magic in not defaulting to kind of stereotypical roles, but thinking as a team how we could genuinely do the hard work of solving problems as a collective.
Or what do you think would be at the forefront of getting the right talent for such a business? Are we thinking skills or character? Because sometimes they don't always come together.
Yeah, so I think it's really important to trust the people that you work with, and that's difficult in the context of a corporate structure where you employ people and you have an interview. I'm not a believer in interviews. I think it's quite a flawed way of appointing people. I think you build trust by working with people and getting to know people. So I'm a big fan of doing small chunks of work with people to work with people and develop trust, and increasingly once you have a small proof of concept to build that to a bigger scale. So I'm a big fan of pilot projects. I'm a big fan of small projects where it doesn't depend on huge amounts of success or failure, but as a way to build trust. Once you've got that, I think, and you build out teams that do fundamentally trust each other, I think then it's a case of understanding each other, and getting to know each other better, and making it work with what you've got. Because I didn't have this foresight when we started CA Connect at the beginning, but we were all in, and we were prepared to make it work. And I think there's parallels to be drawn with a marriage, where in a marriage, something that can set a marriage up for success is saying that we're going to make this work at all costs. And there's safety in that, because within saying that I'm not going anywhere and I'm going to make this work means that you can have conflict and you can have difficult discussions, because we're not putting on the line the existential survival of this relationship, but we're saying we're genuinely trying to engage in figuring out how to make this better. One of the things I hated about a company was, like, I didn't want to be the boss for the sake of being a boss. So I had people who reported to me, and I would tell them, I'm not your boss. And I think in retrospect, I think that was a very confusing statement. But I think in essence, what I was trying to say is we're here to solve a problem. We need to figure it out together. And I disliked the idea that my authority, explicit or tacit, would be the reason that you would do something. Knowing what I know now, as I say, I think there's a good chance that was quite confusing, and definitely not something I would recommend in a big company, because there just has to be a certain amount of order. But I think what I was trying to get to the essence of is, how can we genuinely solve problems? And I love the idea that the best idea must win in a situation. And I think I'm prepared to go through cringeworthy situations at the expense of hoping that the best idea wins. And that definitely leads to mess and lack of structure, and sometimes some difficult conversations. But I have to keep believing that cringe and that work is worth, hopefully, the magic that follows. And it doesn't always, but sometimes it does, and that's worth it.
So I'm curious to know from you, what are the characteristics and the tools or the tips that we can use to solve problems? Because I think we're met with problems every single day, or sometimes weekly, if it's not every single day. But we often met with problems, and it's usually the point of decision where we have to decide whether to go in or to leave it that determines whether or not we're going to achieve the thing, or we're going to get the results we're trusting for. But you've had an interesting journey over the past 15 years of building, and I still can even go as far as saying that there are still challenges that you guys are probably still met with 15 years later, because there's growth. But how do you continuously and consistently, in and out of season, develop a problem-solving mindset?
I think generally when we're dealing with difficult problems, I think a human tendency is to go too much into the detail and lose focus of what we're actually doing. When we have difficult problems, again, we tend to get heated. We tend to exaggerate. We tend to become anxious. And those things are all aspects that get in the way of clarity of thought. It's natural, and they are symptoms of being passionate and committed. And so I wouldn't phrase them as negative aspects. I would say that we need people in different situations who can help us have perspective, though. So to de-escalate, to zoom out, to rephrase are really important tools in thinking clearly about what we're actually trying to do and the problems at hand.
It's so powerful. On the other side of that is agility. It's like being able to see a problem and say, okay, maybe we need to pivot instead of, backing down a little bit. Where do we find the balance?
So agility, I think, is then in the day-to-day and the quick movements. I don't think agility is appropriate on big, long-term objectives. So I'm not going to bring in agility in terms of thinking about my 5 or 10 year future.
Right.
When I'm thinking about how I make things work for the next day or two, in terms of the bigger picture of where we're headed, yes, we must be agile, we must make decisions, and we must not get stuck, and we must get through. If I'm going to make a decision that fundamentally changes my position and perspective for 5 or 10 years, I'm going to think a lot more carefully about it and take a lot more counsel. And I'm not going to think of that as being agile. And I don't want to be agile on that. I actually want to stop myself being agile on those kinds of things, because that changes the trajectory of big picture aspects.
I hope everybody listening and watching this has a notebook and a pen, because you're dropping so many gems. Like, my mind is screaming. I'm having a little fest, because you're saying so many things that I think are extremely profound, to help us build something from scratch and actually grow it for it to become spectacular. Emotional intelligence, how does it come to play?
Yeah, emotional intelligence is important because we are not logical. we don't see things clearly, and we are flawed people.
Coming from a CA, that is so interesting.
I think it is incumbent on all of us to try our best to know ourselves. Firstly, before we worry about knowing other people, we need to try our best to do the hard work of knowing ourselves, so we can see where we are being emotionally unintelligent and extend olive branches to people around our flaws. So if I can come into a room and tell you about, this is me, I'm sorry, I tend to generally do this, it's not my objective, but this is what I'm trying to do. I think that can be helpful in giving other people tools to better manage us, because we manage each other. I think none of us struggle from a work perspective in terms of who we genuinely are. The issues that emotional intelligence equips us for is how people put on their armor. And the way I get defensive and the way you get defensive are the things that cause us struggles in our relationship together. And our tools in being able to disarm each other and de-escalate our defenses are some of the magic, I think, that can help us break through into unlocking each other's potential.
Sure. That's profound. That is so profound. It's almost like I needed to settle into my spirit. That was really good.
And I think maybe to build on it, I think that is really important work for all of us to do, is to ask ourselves, what are our triggers for our defenses? When I look at my co-founders and the times when we had conflict, I think some of the essence that helped us move through that was to understand that those defenses weren't helping us, understanding why they were arising, to zoom out and get perspective and reframe, so that we could move through those and harness them to do the work we were here to do, and not to get sidetracked and disarmed by paths that just weren't helpful to us.
Yeah. And also, I'm imagining a level of patience in the mix as well, with others and yourself throughout the process.
And that's hard, and that's where we need each other.
Exactly.
Because I am not patient. I want things to work, and I don't understand why people don't see it my way.
Yeah.
But that's where we help each other in those defenses of saying, I understand that you are irritated now and frustrated, and you don't see it in this way. But how can we help me understand the way you do see it? Help me understand why this is some of the thinking that you're going through. And I think that's a beautiful way to look at the world. If you ask me about what my favorite quote is, I'll always say, to know all is to forgive all. And I love that, because it means that anytime there's a misunderstanding between people, it's fundamentally due to a lack of information. And so if I can get information and understand how you think about the world, then we can make breakthroughs. And so how can we unlock information that allows us to see each other's perspective? And then oftentimes the choice isn't A or B. The choice is maybe C or D, or AB, or somewhere in between. And I think that's the power of understanding each other. And because we genuinely, when we know all, we would forgive all. And so my question is, if I am misunderstanding, what is the information that I'm lacking?
I did not think you were going to make me cry. You did not look like somebody who would get me emotional, because I think what you're saying is so true. And sometimes when we are either studying or working towards, some goal, it's always about the bottom line. And what I'm really appreciating about the things that you're saying is that we're getting to the heart of actually solving the problem, is that you have to face yourself, and you have to face the people that you are tasked to walk through this journey with. And that is such a profound and sometimes quite a difficult thing to do.
And it doesn't really get easier over time. I think things change and there are eras.
Yeah.
But I still have insecurities. I still don't feel brave about facing the world. I still doubt myself when I go into a difficult situation. And I think that's important for anyone who's listening to kind of stories that other people tell, is to not mistake learnings from the past as being substitutes for people saying, now I've figured out the world and now I have the silver bullet and now I know how everything works.
Sure. Gareth, I worked so hard for this makeup I have on. I worked so hard to look this good, and now it's about to... Okay, so I want to move on to AI. Talk about more serious stuff that are not emotional. We are seeing the rise of tech and how it's changing different industries. How are you thinking about AI in light of everything you've built?
Yeah, I think AI is interesting because it's changing and none of us know where it's going to end. And I think it does apply differently to different jobs. I think there will be jobs that AI changes significantly. I think if we speak about it directly in the context of CAs, who I would see as strategic business people who contribute to the forming of systems in business, contributing to society and economy, in that context, I don't think it takes our jobs. I think it lets us do more jobs than we could do before. I think AI is incredibly powerful in terms of an amplification for our thinking. I think it's dangerous in terms of we can easily make the mistake of letting AI think for us. So as an example, when I would talk about AI and when I use AI, my first piece of advice is don't start in the AI. In other words, I'm not going to go to ChatGPT and write a prompt in there. I'm going to write either on paper or in Word or a blank document, and I'm first going to clarify my thinking on a topic. I think there's a risk if you go into the AI too soon that the temptation to press enter and get what AI thinks is very tempting. And so I want to prevent myself from letting AI think for me. And so I want to clarify my thoughts, because once what I do know is that once I have clarified my thinking and I have drafted a page or two or three, then AI is going to help me think about that and help me see my blind spots and amplify my thinking and bring in skills that I don't have. So in terms of amplified thinking, I think it's incredibly powerful. I'm not a psychologist. I'm not a programmer. I am not an economist. But I have thoughts and I have a role and I have work that is important for me to do that needs to draw on those roles and that type of thinking. And if I can harness AI to help me think about those aspects of my work, then wow, it's going to be incredibly powerful in changing the way we work.
It's taking away the fear of this is what it might do to my profession, and actually partnering with it to help you escalate and enhance what you're already doing. That is absolutely profound. Is this something that you see forming part as policy at all in any profession?
I think a lot of the work in industry becomes more and more about managing AIs as constituent parts of teams. So you'd have a team that generally, if you're a manager, maybe you'd manage 5 people. Now maybe part of your team is managing 5 people and 5 AIs. And I think there become interesting questions about AIs as people and how they are managed in the roles they play in teams. And I think that's going to get confusing, because just what I've said is a confusing statement about, is an AI a person?
Yeah.
But I think those are the kind of societal things that we're going to grapple with that are going to impact the economy. I think there's big questions around citizenship and what is a person. But in a lot of ways, it's not new territory. If we think about, we already have companies, and a company, if you look at the law, is a non-natural person. So we have precedent for the existence of non-natural persons. And so from a citizenship perspective, we're going to be facing difficult questions about, are AIs sovereign people? Can they vote? What is their role? I think that's looking quite far down the line. But I think you have to start looking at those long-term impacts to think about the role that those AIs would play today.
Sure. And I mean, essentially what you guys also did 15 years ago was become more tech adjacent. Essentially.
Something we didn't realize, I think, when we started CA Connect was that a lot of the business model around taking education to people, which is essentially what we were doing, because we were saying, well, a lot of people can't go to a full-time residential university and study in that place full-time. A lot of it depended on tech, because that's exactly what tech does.
Yeah.
Tech goes to you and says that you don't have to come to a place. It increases our mobility. It suddenly makes us able to appear in America in a meeting and be mobile without any of the cost related to it. And so I think when we started, and this was some of the naivety back in 2009, 2010, when we started, there just simply wasn't that tech available. So we were looking at TV channels as an example of how we could take education to people, because you didn't have a Microsoft Teams meeting, you didn't have Zoom, you didn't have all those things. And so that was the naivety of starting, where we didn't actually have the tools to do what we needed to do. And systematically, as the tech has improved, we thought, wow, there's a mechanism for our business. And what was great about the facilitation of the tech in that way is we didn't start our business around tech. We had an unchanged vision from 2009 that through tech we were able to better implement that. And there were other things. COVID was also a huge impact, because prior to COVID, online education had very low credibility. It was seen as the ugly stepchild of education, and it was seen as not real education. And COVID, when everyone scrambled to deliver education without physical classes, showed that there is a genuine place for online education. So tech combined with societal change gave mechanisms for the original vision to be implemented. From a founding perspective, this wasn't built around tech. This wasn't built around online education. This was built around solving a key need that is independent of tech, that is independent of COVID, that is independent of any of these business aspects. But if there's a genuine need, then it transcends those things. And the tech and the societal change just provide different mechanisms around how that can be delivered.
If we were to ask your team, like, to impersonate you, or to like do something that you always do, or say something that you always say, what do you think it would be?
Oh, we get a lot of those, the Gareth memes. In my videos that I make for students, apparently I always start with, right guys, let's go. Okay. In the spirit of no nonsense and let's get down to business and no messing around.
Yeah.
With staff, from a meeting perspective, I think I'll often say, guys, what we don't want to do. And I'll juxtapose because I always think it's unhelpful to say what we do want to do. I think we need to create a tension between what we don't want to do. So guys, let's not do this is something that I would probably say, but you'd probably have to ask others.
Yeah. The last thing I want to ask you is, what was the pursuit of happiness moment? You know, and if you've watched the Will Smith movie, A Pursuit of Happiness, where he's just gotten the job and he's walking, the shot is he's in a crowd and he's clapping his hands. He's in disbelief of just, oh my gosh, it finally happened. This is the moment that's going to change my life. I've been waiting for it. I'm just in disbelief and in tears. What was that moment for you throughout this journey?
I think in general, probably the type of person who doesn't celebrate success enough. And I think that's something where the others around me help me do that. I think for whatever reason, I grew up thinking that I would definitely be destitute and living on the street and not have a job. So a lot of what kept me going, I think, was trying to make sure I had a home and a family. And I think at some point, an entrepreneurial business isn't a very good way to get rid of that fear, because I think the nature of a new business is that you don't have security, and that you are dealing with kind of existential issues, especially in the first few years, and a lot of the issues, like how you get through that. But I think at some point in the business, you build up sufficient margin to say, well, even if A and B doesn't work, things will still continue. And a lot of the stress of the early days is you really have all your eggs in one basket. So if A doesn't work, then it feels like that would be it. But it was probably around a time when we developed sufficient credibility in the industry that we didn't feel like we were just a bunch of people doing their first job. Because I think the first probably 7 years of the business felt like there was no credibility behind what we actually did. And there were a lot of people telling us we couldn't, and it was impossible what we were trying to do.
Yeah.
And so at some point it tipped, and we had credible staff joining our business.
Nice.
We had students who were talking about the benefits of the process they'd come through with us. And there was some critical mass building up of credibility that said, no, this was more than just an idea. This was more than just a naive view. And it was something that genuinely could make a difference to the systems in the world. And I think when that happened, that was quite a relief in terms of we weren't just hallucinating this idea of the world, and that there was substance to what we were trying to do.
Sure. That's beautiful. So for the Founders Series, we're doing something special to wrap the conversation up, which I call the Founders Phone. So I want you to think about it like this. If a founder were to give you a call right now and they're having a bad day, doesn't matter what happened, and all they did is they rang their phone and you answered without them saying a word, what would you say to them to encourage them?
Well, I think I would say, how are you? I think a lot of times when we need people in our lives, they're not there to solve our problems. They're there to reflect back to us things that we already knew. And I think some of the most important roles we play for people is not solving their problems or telling them what's wrong. I think people know the answers. And I think a lot of our roles is in helping them strip away the noise. And I would look to have a conversation about how we can strip away the noise so that they can find what's actually going on.
Sure.
Because they know the answer.
Oh, thank you for answering the phone. Thank you for joining me, Gareth. This has been such a beautiful conversation. So reflective for me. I think it's one of those conversations I'm going to watch over and over again with a notepad and a pen and writing so many things, because what you've reflected today is, I think, the power and the intention and the posture of true leadership when you're building anything. So thank you for joining me.
Thanks, Michelle. It's been great to talk to you.
Absolutely amazing conversation. We hope that you enjoyed it. And let us know, this was so reflective, like I mentioned, let us know in the comment section, wherever you're listening or watching this, what was your aha moment? I had several, but I'd like to know which ones were yours. We'll see you guys on our next podcast episode.
Control Alt Succeed.
Control Alt Succeed is proudly brought to you by Milpark Education, redefining what online learning sounds like. Visit milpark.ac.za for more information.